Michigan Magazine is made possible in part by a grant from Oldsmobile. Oldsmobile and the Olds retailers throughout the state invite you to explore the beauty of Michigan. This is one of the most familiar attractions of the Great Lakes area, the Big Mac, or Mackinac Bridge. Stretching from Mackinac City to St. Ignace, it was designed by the same famous New York bridge designer who headed the reconstruction of the Brooklyn Bridge, David B. Steinman. Some said it could never be done, the linking of the upper to the lower peninsula of Michigan via a bridge. But 3.5 years after groundbreaking, the bridge was open to traffic, a modern-day wonder still today. In its time, the largest suspension bridge in the world. Some may dispute this, saying San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge is longer. Not so. We visited with the Executive Secretary of the Mackinac Bridge Authority, Walter North, to talk about the bridge's history and to ask the question, what is bigger, the Mackinac Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge?
Well, Barry, they're both have one number in their favor. The Golden Gate Bridge has a longer center span. The distance between the main towers is 4,200 feet, compared to ours is 3,800 feet. But if you add up all the suspended portions of this Golden Gate Bridge out in San Francisco, it falls way short of what the suspended total is for the Mackinac Bridge. So the Mackinac Bridge is the longest suspension bridge, and the Golden Gate Bridge has a longer center span.
How far are we talking from entrance to entrance from the bridge here?
Well, you're talking about 4.5 miles from the, including the causeway here. And when you add the approaches, you're talking about 5 miles.
Now, this is a wonder in itself. This was dedicated to when? Back in 57, 58?
It opened to traffic on November 1st of 1957, and the official dedication was held the following June in 1958. They had 3 days of festivities and activities up here, jet plane flyovers, 83 queens from each of the Michigan's 83 counties, each with their own convertible. Then Governor Williams was here, and a lot of dignitaries, and just a lot of people here to see Michigan's two peninsulas formally united.
Now this is an opening to the Michigan, the St. Ignace side. Before that we had, what, just barges and ferries across
You had the car ferries, and they were run by the Highway Department, started in the early 1920s, and even prior to that, the only way you could get a car across from one peninsula of Michigan to the other, without going all the way around Lake Michigan by way of Chicago or all the way around Lake Huron by way of Ontario, was on a railroad car ferry, and it was on a space allowed type thing. If there weren't enough railroad cars to fill up the car ferry, why then they were allowed to put cars and trucks on. Then in the mid-1920s, the then State Highway Department began the car ferry service, and that ran right up until the opening of the bridge. The last several years they were in operation, they had 5 car ferries. They ran on a year-round basis, and Barry, the last year they were in operation for an entire year, in 1956, there was just under 900,000 crossings. This year, this past year, we had 4 times that level of activity.
My goodness. People suddenly discovered the other part of the state more accessible than those early years.
Well, it made it much easier to travel.
Yeah.
The crossing time on the car ferries, even with the more modern ones in the late 50s, was about 55 minutes, and then you had the time to load and unload. You also had waits at peak traffic periods like the 4th of July maybe, or deer season, waits of up to 17 hours. And now, of course, people can cross in 10 or 15 minutes time, and even at a busy holiday weekend, the maximum lineup at the Fair Plaza is about 15 to 20 minutes.
When did construction begin on the bridge?
It began in May of 1954, and it took about 3.5 years to complete the construction of the bridge. Took 42 months, and interestingly enough, there was no taxpayer money. This was financed entirely by private interest by selling revenue bonds to investors. The proceeds of that bond sale were used to hire contractors, if you will. They built the bridge, put up toll booths, started charging people to use the facility, and used those funds along with other monies to repay the investors.
What was the total construction cost of the bridge back then?
Well, it was about $78 or $79 million, but then the cost of the money during the construction period, because the minute those bonds were sold in '54, the interest meter started, so there was about $18 million in interest that was paid during the construction period. So what was paid to the contractors, roughly $78 million, and another $18 million paid to the investors.
Okay. Now compare that cost, if you would, to building the Mackinac Bridge in an economy such as today. What would that cost?
Well, we get an estimate each fall from our consulting engineers as to what the replacement cost of the bridge might be, and they use rates of inflation, construction indices, and things of that nature. and it was estimated this last September that the cost would be a little in excess of $390 million. Now that's not with the cost of the money, that's only what would estimated payments to contractors, so that's gone up almost fivefold.
Tell me, where does the funding come now for maintenance to maintain this huge...
Well, it's a user pay concept, Barry. The fares that are collected out there by the fare attendants is used to operate and maintain the bridge, and also to repay the state of Michigan for monies that were advanced after the bridge opened to traffic.
Well, we were talking a little bit about, we just touched on the maintenance now. This is an ongoing thing here as far as maintaining this bridge to the proper level of integrity. Now, what's the process?
You indicated, Barry, it is an ongoing, maintenance activities are ongoing. In the wintertime, they're not quite so varied. It's usually snow removal or treating slippery conditions out there with sand. We don't use salt for ice control because of the corrosive effect it would have on the steel. But in the late spring, summer, and early fall months, our maintenance activities are highly geared to painting of the structure. And it takes about 9 years to get from one end to the other, and it takes over 70,000 gallons of paint. And the paint we put on holds up for about 9 years, so that's an ongoing thing. We do get into pavement repairs, we get into adjusting the tension on the suspender cables, joint repairs, yards and grounds, things of that nature.
9 years to paint a bridge? I mean, he must start at the end, and then another crew must start at the other end as he's in the middle of the bridge. Is that it?
No, it doesn't work out that way. Usually we start at one end and progress across. Last year we finished painting the suspended portions, and this spring, in fact, some of our painters just came back to work today as their first day back on the job, and we'll begin in Mackinac City with the approach spans.
I see. Now, how would a painter become accessible to the tower? How do they climb this tower? A little specifics on that.
Well, it depends on what, we have scaffolding that we use. We have motorized scaffolding underneath the bridge that goes from bay to bay for inspection and painting. We have what we call spider staging that climbs right up to suspender cables. It's kind of a bucket type thing, arrangement, and a basket, and most people would be a basket case by the time they got down, if they weren't when they went up, Barry. So it depends on the particular portion of the bridge we're painting. Our electricians, for instance, walk right up those main cables on the bridge when they're changing the light bulbs up there. You talked about changing lights. Then when they get up to the top, they're 552 foot above the water, so that's essentially the height of our Washington Monument. So it's certainly not a job for the faint-hearted, and we're extremely proud of our record of safety, knock on wood here, but we've never had a real serious accident involving any of our work persons, so we're very proud of that record of safety.
Have you had the chance yourself to go to the top of the bridge?
Yes, we have an elevator that goes up one leg of each of the two main towers, and you get up almost to the top, and then you have to go through some cell-like areas and then up a ladder and come out on the top crossover. We use that for maintenance purposes, and perhaps we'll even be kind to the photographers today and allow them to go up there and get some spectacular shots.
To the very top of the Mackinac Bridge, now there's an opportunity we couldn't pass up. What a view it must be. Walter immediately introduced us to our guide, Greg, who shuttled us to the North Tower elevator, where we squeezed in to the elevator with barely enough room for 3. Then 6 flights up, we left the elevator into a maze of corridors, then up a ladder to the top. Was it worth it? You bet. Look at that. Oh, there's a view not many people get, huh? Statistics show that around 50% of the citizens of Michigan have not seen in person the Mackinac Bridge. So to those of you who have not yet, we dedicate these scenes to you with an invitation to come on up or come on down, depending on what peninsula you call home, to see the Big Mac up close. It's an experience you won't forget. You may not get the opportunity we had of climbing to the top, but if you stop at the Visitors Orientation Center on the St. Ignace side, you'll discover more fascinating and intriguing facts about one of the most picture-taken wonders of the world, the Mackinac Bridge, the Big Mac. We'd like to thank Walter North and Greg Shimkovitz of the Mackinac Bridge Authority for sharing with us the story of the Big Mac.